Welcome back to the Rob Skinner podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Today I'm interviewing Roger and Marcia Lamb. After serving as an evangelist for 23 years, Roger served for the last 30 years as the director of media for the International Churches of Christ, building the nonprofit media companies KNN and Disciples Today to connect disciples and churches around the world. He was instrumental in the release of DT Heart and Soul, Disciples Today Heart and Soul, for single disciples that have now produced at least 100 weddings and 21 babies. Disciple Adventures, a website to connect people and churches for short-term missions, and DT Counselor, an online office for anyone in the world to meet with commended disciples in our churches who are professional, licensed counselors. DT Connect is a website that offers coaching services to help disciples grow professionally. He continues to teach and preach at retreats and conferences, and on the Steps of the Apostles tours he leads in the Mediterranean. Marcia is a multiple award-winning writer and accomplished playwright with a passion for acting and helping women who have suffered abuse. She wrote a book sharing God's lessons they learned as they dealt with her son's leukemia and her own cancer in the DPI book, This Doesn't Feel Like Love. That's available on Amazon and DT Media Shop. Her recent portrayal of Salome, mother of James and John, deeply moved audiences in Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, and in the Mediterranean. What's significant about this interview is that Roger will be retiring from his position at Disciples Today on August 31st, and we are recording this just a few days in advance of that. Before we get into the program, I'd like to let you know about a mission planting happening in the summer of 2021. We're planting a church in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Pam and I are looking for people interested in leading that team as well as joining that team as members. If you're interested, please contact me at rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org, rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org, or you can call Pam or email her at pamelajskinner@gmail.com. It's a great situation. There's a small house church there right now that's been there for a while, and I'll be organizing and training the mission team members to go up there, and we'll be there for part of the summer next year in order to get that church off the ground. So if you're interested in that, it's exciting. Love for you to contact me about that. Thank you. Now back to the program. Roger and Marcia, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you on the program today. Would you mind sharing how you became Christians, your Christian background?
Wow, that's a great question. We both grew up in the traditional Churches of Christ. Marcia in Indiana, myself in Colorado and Germany, a couple other places. My dad was in the military. So we had very strong biblical teaching from the time we were young. I still remember our vacation Bible schools and Sunday schools, and it's just very strong teaching the Bible. In high school, I was the only teenager in our little church of about 100 on base. That was a real conviction clarifying moment for me in many ways. But then I got exposed to missionaries, and I saw missionaries who were there to enjoy Europe, and I saw missionaries who were there to evangelize. And they really changed my life. Stanley Shipp was one of the main guys. Then I went to Harding and met Marcia on Friday before classes started our freshman year, where the three sidewalks meet in front of the student center late in the afternoon on Friday, and she doesn't remember it at all.
I'm beginning to remember it the more he tells the story.
So
it changed my life.
We became great friends and went on missions every summer in a group, and the same group, and we got married before our senior year of college, and then went to Houston as a youth minister right out of college, with the intention of going with a group of friends of ours and planting a church in Germany. But they wound up going. That didn't work out for us. we were wound up in Charleston, Illinois, a town of 10,000 with a campus of 10,000 in the middle of cornfields and soybeans.
Yes.
And the when I got there, my grandpa sent me a picture and told me that he had lived in that same town when he was a boy. And his dad was the preacher for the same church I was preaching for
Wow.
from 1894 to 1898. And I had no idea
That's
he was even
amazing.
a preacher. It was mind-boggling. So God blessed that in terms of that little group grew 60 to 120 in 3 years. But
Wow.
I was pretty frustrated with the adults. I was frustrated. I didn't realize the real reason for it. But we had a lot of college students coming. I didn't see them really changing their lives or anything. And I thought, well, we need a campus minister.
Right.
So I'd been following the Crossroads movement through their bulletins, very impressed. So I raised the money for a campus minister and called up Sam Lang and said, do you have anybody you trained? He said, oh, yes, we have Tom Brown, Kip McKean, and Steve Gooch. And so he sent me resumes. We interviewed Tom. He went on to Boulder and took that job. I don't know why he went to Boulder over Charleston, Illinois. And they interviewed Kip and hired Kip. And he did a very smart thing. He challenged me to go to their Florida seminar before he moved up that fall. He wasn't married yet, came by himself. But I took an elder, went down there, and it blew my mind. I saw what I'd always been taught the New Testament church should be or was like,
Right.
the Acts church. And, I saw all these people of all ages, all races, all committed to God and committed to each other and being evangelistic. And it just blew my mind. I thought, this is awesome. So I was really curious how that happened, because I'd pretty much given up on the idea, honestly, of a New Testament church being able to be in today's world. So Kip comes and I start seeing the lives of people change radically, like Marty Fuqua, Mark Mancini, and many others. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to figure this out. And then we had a retreat. And at the end of the retreat, I was so convicted. I had the Sunday sermon. And on the front pew, I just put the sermon in the back of my Bible. And I got up and I said, I'm not going to preach today. I'm going to make a confession. There's three kinds of people in the world: those who say they believe in Jesus, but they don't live it; the kind that just don't believe in Jesus at all, and they admit it; and the third kind say they believe in Jesus and they really follow him. And I said, I've been the first kind.
Wow.
I'm your preacher, and my heart has not been committed totally to God and to Jesus. And I've not been really a true follower. And I'm repenting of that. I'm changing that, and I expect you to do the same thing.
Wow.
And in those days, we had an invitation.
Right. I remember that. Yes.
For prayer. 80% of the church came forward and stuff. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So that was a huge point, a change for me, and leading me to become a true Christian. And
that's awesome.
And Marcia made a similar commitment a little while later.
Right.
So
that's amazing. So it was a huge cultural shock and transition for you guys.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah.
I mean, we had a lot, as Roger mentioned, like head knowledge, but this was really taking it deeper. And we'd had moments like that, perhaps in college, removed. But as he said, the environment around us didn't support that. It was kind of like, go to church, the rest of your life, is your business. So that was the difference.
Right.
For us.
Well, Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the reason it took me a little longer is he came home like, we're going to be totally committed. We're going to put God first every day. We're going to study the Bible every day. We're going to reach out. We're going to, change our lives. And I thought, that's not going to work. You're going to see it's going to fail. So I'll give it a week. And then at the end of the week, it was the best week of my life. So things changed.
Amazing, the humility to make that kind of a change, to make that kind of a statement. I mean, that must have just been a shocker for people, and it changed your life. That's incredible.
It did.
It felt much more like conviction than humility.
Wow.
It was very humbling to have to do that. The other really key element there at Crossroads was the teaching on one another relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And the churches we grew up in were very friendly and warm and hospitable. We had people at our house all the time, but the relationships weren't deep spiritually. And in fact, when I was a youth minister in Houston, the minister told me his advice was only get close to 3 families. And, the scripture we heard quoted a lot about relationships was everybody mind your own business. And frankly, when the movement started, that's where we caught a lot of flack because it scared a lot of people
Right.
to be open and have people deeply involved in your life.
Right.
But we were craving that
Right.
and needing that so badly, as most people do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm so grateful for all those beginnings there in Crossroads and what we have benefited from.
Right. Well, it's really interesting because if listeners are familiar with the history of the ICOC, the campus ministry movement, the Boston movement, they may have heard of, probably have heard of Kip McKean from Crossroads, from Gainesville, Florida, and then for Boston, almost as if he went directly from Boston or from Crossroads to Boston. But there was the 70s there that he was right there in the Midwest, right there with you. And what a bird's eye view you had of the development of what would later become the Boston movement and then the ICOC. It's incredible. Right. You saw it right there at its infancy.
Marcia often calls it the prenatal movement.
Or prehistoric.
Or prehistoric. But Crossroads was sending out these campus ministers in traditional churches. And we had 10 of them in the Midwest. But most of them did not end well. Most of them, the preachers and the elders did not back the campus minister. And I had a real heart for them because I just felt for them. So we had seminars and conference retreats and stuff. And I would call them to try to encourage them. That was the beginning of the Midwest Ministries, actually, that went on later in the Midwest.
Okay, so can you give me just a quick rundown of how long you were there, and then you moved on, you went to Boston, Chicago. I mean, you've gone all over the place, but maybe up until the time you made a career change that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But where'd you go, and how long were you there after that?
Oh, good. Thanks. We were in Charleston 10 years. We went there in 1973. Kip and Elena moved to Boston in 1989. I'm sorry, 1979.
Right.
And started there, with the movement.
Right.
Boston movement started. And then a few years later, in 1981, Michael got leukemia. 1983, we moved to Champaign, Illinois, planted the church there. Then in 1985, Chicago Church, which was the first church planting in the movement, they asked us to move up there to help. The church was growing rapidly and needed help with, so we moved up there. We were there from 85 to 88. The church went from an attendance of 350 to 1,500 in those 3 years.
It's amazing.
It was unbelievable.
Wow.
And then Marcia got cancer, and
I hope it
then we
wasn't.
moved to
Hope,
Boston.
hope that wasn't related there. The rapid growth and then getting cancer. Oh my
Oh, it
gosh.
was.
Oh my gosh.
No,
Okay.
No, but
no, other things were happening.
Okay.
there were a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
So we moved to Boston then to scale back, focus on our family, and retool.
Okay. Okay. So let's go from there. Your lives. You're up until that time. You're doing ministry, and you did serve 23 years as an evangelist, pulpit minister. Then you stopped and doing the full-time ministry, and you really changed careers. There was a huge shift there, kind of midlife. And Roger, you went on to do your work with KNN, Disciples Today, which we'll talk about later in the program. Marcia, you went on to become an author, a playwright, and an actress. You went off in a completely different direction. Now, I know it didn't happen just a one day with premeditation, but it definitely led there. You've spent a lifetime helping women who've suffered abuse and those who are enduring illness. Can you tell me about where'd that come from? How did that develop? And just tell me a little bit about where that started.
Okay, thanks. I think as far as the writing and being an author, actually it went along with the ministry hand in hand in many ways, because when we had women's programs for, Pat Yipple would be heading that. One of the things she always requested was that we would actually write a chapter about the subject we'd be teaching on. We had some really good books for women that came out during those times, and I apologize, I can't think of the names of all of them, but I contributed to several of those, and I got really good feedback from them. So that was very encouraging, of course. And so from there, the skits, actually, I kind of laugh when I'm called an actress, because I'm just a ham, is the truth. And I've been a ham since I was a kid. It's one of those things that I can't help but doing. It's just me. And but through the years, we all have these banquets and programs,
Right.
and then Sunday morning, once in a while, we get a program. So those were the things I contributed to, and it was a lot of fun, and it was easy for me. So I know it was God put it in me.
Right.
As you mentioned, a couple of them led then to, my writing went on to work with Roger in Disciples Today, KNN, and LA Story. So I was an editor for those. And then when we did the dramatics with KNN, those were usually requested by the church when we had women's days or men's days. And so I would write the storyline, and I didn't have the skills to actually do the script writing. So we'd have the brothers and sisters that were really gifted in those areas would write the script. They were the professional groups. Yeah, professionals, very professional and very good. And they turned my stories into a script. And then, of course, we had some great brothers that would be the directors. And so it was a wonderful time doing the dramatics, especially the cross was so moving. And those are still available on Disciples Today and IPI media store, right?
Yes.
I mean, we used to
And the
love those
dramatics are on our YouTube page also.
Yeah.
I just remember when those would come out periodically, and we loved it. I remember, was it called Secrets of the Heart?
Yeah.
I mean, Pam and I would just sit there, and every time there was a new one coming out, we just loved it. So I didn't know that you were behind that. You came up with a story. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.
If I can brag on her, here's a couple of trophies, awards that were given. Every one of those dramatic things, and most every other KNN we got received an award.
Wow.
Telly Awards. That you'll see these in the background in people's Zoom meetings now.
That's amazing.
Shelves.
Oh, they're terrible to dust.
Okay, that's great.
Anyway, so those were awesome experiences. And so it was sort of a growing experience. As far as, I don't know, what else
I think
help me, dear.
Well, no, she's done, as you mentioned, these characters, which are just so moving and creative, like the Salome character. Mm-hmm. Then she has another character that she'd started in Charleston, actually, called Granny Claus. And she's done that every Christmas since 1970.
Wow.
8,
David,
9, somewhere in there.
Was baby.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And she's performed that for huge crowds in LA, Chicago, Boston, different places, and then just small groups for kids. And it's Santa Claus's grandma. So she even has her own YouTube channel.
Because she raised him from just a little boy.
So, anyway, I could go on.
There you go.
Yeah.
I could go on. But actually, one of the other things I did during that our time was I was actually a teacher's aide. I don't know what they call it nowadays,
right.
But a teacher's assistant for about 10 years with children that were hearing impaired or had special needs. So I learned sign language in college and was able to use the sign language to interpret in our worship services in Chicago, and then worked with children. So that was my career.
Okay.
The other things were my
right.
love.
So I'm going to ask you more about that book later in the program, but
sure.
When you talk about helping women who've suffered abuse, how did that show up? Where did that come from? What drove that? Okay,
that's another God happening. For LA Story, we tried to highlight the different ministries and what they were doing in hopes of inspiring people in other churches all around the U.S. and internationally. So one of the stories that I had wanted to do and was assigned to do was for the group they called the Freedom Group at that time. And this was a group in LA. Yeah, in LA. And it was a group of people along with a couple of psychologists that were disciples that got together, and they had every Saturday for a couple of months, I think it was. So they, anyway, it was very, very inspiring. It was always a devotional scripture, encouragement. And then we would break off into small groups, either, men together, women together, and spouses together, or significant helpers. And so it was during that first time that I was gathering this information and listening to the stories of the people in our group. And I thought, I don't know, I think I need to come back to this. I need to come back to this group. And so I did. And it was a very healing, exposing time for me. I read books that they recommended. I did counseling. But that group was probably the most helpful, because as a person having gone through the sexual abuse, you feel like you're the only one. You feel like you're just responsible for everything that happened. And it's a time of sharing stories so that you're not alone. And the people that have been there longer were able to help us then to reason it out, but also to say, you're not crazy.
Right.
It does affect you later in your life. So from there, I went on and had a group in LA, and then also in Chicago that was very encouraging, very successful, and successful in the means that their lives really changed and their relationships changed.
Wow.
And certainly most was that my life changed and my relationships changed. I say it's like when you don't have glasses and you can't see clearly, or the ones you have are dirty, or the windows are dirty and you can't see clearly. And then all of a sudden, oh, so that's what a tree looks like. And for me, it was issues of trust. I just had, by my experiences, it just didn't trust people. And I guess being an actress, I could act like I trusted people,
Right.
but I just didn't. And so it was very difficult for me to trust what was happening. I went along with it, but a lot of times I couldn't trust leaders. I couldn't trust people getting into my life. So one of the themes that I feel really strongly about is I do believe that Satan attacks us when we're very young. Like he attacked the early church, he attacked Moses and
Right.
Jesus as a baby, and he just goes after us when we're very young and impressionable and we can't even express what's going on, and it so that he can plant his seeds of God doesn't love you, you can't trust love, you can't trust people, you're the crazy one. All these things are planted in our minds. And so it takes, so that's Satan's attack. And so as disciples and women who have gone through this, and men, we need to be able to attack Satan's lies with the truth. And it's a hard work. It's hard work to believe the truth after living the lies, because Satan also sends you lots of things that make you think, oh yeah, see, God doesn't love you. And I think that was anyway, that to me is a message I want to get out. I've started a book. I have it almost halfway done. And it's going to be more about on a personal level, but also from the scriptures. When you are working on these things, you see a lot more in the scriptures that are there for us.
What's the name of the book?
I don't know. No,
Okay.
I think it's going to be Secrets of the Heart.
Oh,
really.
I love that. Love that. That's
yeah,
fantastic.
I do too.
So you went to a group, and
Mhm.
all of a sudden it just triggered a lot of memories. Obviously, it brought back a lot of stuff. You're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot here. It just resonate. You felt it in your body, like, oh my gosh, I've got to be here.
I couldn't talk about it. I would almost faint, and just the subject matter, I would just practically faint.
How long did how long did it take you from that first meeting to just be able to talk about your past and just deal with it?
Well, within the group, I think God only gives us memory of what we can handle.
I see.
I see a lot of women are in their 30s when they've come to realization. It's very difficult to deal with it with someone who's not ready, or a younger person and are fresh out of it. I mean, if you can work with someone when it happens, a young person, they won't have the scars that many of us live with. But that doesn't happen very often because there's so much shame and fear that you don't talk about it during this, while it's going on, or maybe years and years after. You want to, as a matter of fact, I was, quote, dunked, baptized as a 12-year-old without any studies, but I did it because I wanted that old, bad, nasty person to be washed away.
Right.
And I didn't want to think about her anymore.
Right.
So that's kind of how I survived from that point on. Just never talked about it until this group. And I don't know, just being able to talk about it, having someone listen without correcting or shaming or, saying, oh, boys will be boys or whatever. Sometimes their responses are more painful than what happened. And so a group of people who've gone through it makes it a lot
Right.
easier to talk about because you're not going to be shamed. It's a safe group.
Did Roger know about this going into your marriage?
I don't think so. Did you? No.
That
Because
must.
as a Christian, we think, well, it's baptized, it's gone, that's in the past. Don't think about it. But I think there are a lot of women, especially Christian women, who are just hurting and stuck and fearful, and that this is the situation. And
Okay. Go ahead.
can
I'm
I
sorry.
say one more thing?
Of
I
course.
firmly believe that when Jesus came, he did come to seek and save the lost. But his first sermon, he talks about how he came to heal the sick and give sight to the blind and set the captives free. And I think there's a lot of us who are captives that have not been set free because we haven't actually gone down the path of healing that Jesus offers us. And it doesn't just happen in a, what do we call them, those count the cost sessions. It doesn't just happen then. It's a continuation all our lives, growing close to God.
If someone, Marcia, were struggling and they're listening to you and they're like, wow, that really hits home for me, what would you advise them to do? Where could they go? Who could they talk to?
Honestly, that is a difficult question. There haven't been that in the past. There haven't been that many people to go to. But if there are counselors in the church, definitely a counselor is usually prepared to work with this type thing. That's what I went. I went with that in mind, and it was very, very helpful. Pardon me? Yeah, Robin Widener. She even does counseling over the phone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's who I would recommend.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to make a plea to our people in the ministry to be sure they're getting this knowledge of how to deal with this, because there's been a lot of damage done by the pat answers that people are given, and it really shuts people down.
Right.
And they just don't want to talk about it, or basically they just die inside.
Right. Roger and Marcia, reading your biographical sketch, I'm struck by two themes: communication or connection and chronic illnesses. And so, if you don't mind, let's first talk about the communication and connection. You've spent a career bringing disciples together, whether it's organizing the Boston Conference. It's amazing that you did that. I didn't realize you're in charge of that. The Boston Bulletin, Discipleship Magazine, KNN, Disciples Today, Heart and Soul, and all the other programs that we mentioned at the beginning of the program. I just want to ask you, what inspired you to get involved in all these different areas of service?
Wow, that's a great question. Thanks. I think it started in seeing the division in churches when I was growing up. And there were, we were in a small town, and there were like 5 or 6 churches of Christ in the town that hardly had anything to do with each other. And then the more I grew up and learned, the more I learned about all these different factions, where somebody would pick a doctrine and harp on it, and to pull a group of people off after themselves, and on pretty silly things like, 1 cup, whether you had a kitchen in your building or not, stuff like that. So you knew it wasn't the doctrine, it was more than that.
Right.
And then went to college and learned more about that, and saw the division racially among our churches, and I was like, why? This is the 60s, right? This is the end of the 60s.
Right.
Civil rights movement, all this stuff. I somehow got elected president of the Student Arkansas Education Association, and so got invited to all these conferences around the South on integration, desegregation. I was at one of those when Martin Luther King was shot.
Oh my gosh.
And that had a profound effect on me. And then I went into the ministry in Houston there, and again, saw the same thing with these churches. And I'm like, this shouldn't be. And reading the Bible more and more, Jesus' vision of unity and connection in the body of Christ is so different than that. So I think that instilled in me a deep desire to see connection, see unity and among people. And then, so when we started the movement, we had deep convictions that we needed to be unified, very deep convictions, and not on just a superficial level, but a real deep level. And deep convictions that we needed to be for all races. We were not going to recreate a church that's only, one race. And so those were intentionally worked at. And then, I used a lot of the experiences that I'd had because I'd always been interested in communications. From my first job as an announcer in high school, I was on an Air Force base in Germany. I was announcing for this TV station.
Right.
And then later, very interested in this kind of stuff. So I'd always written, I'd always been really interested in writing and really believed the power of media. And then when we used it a lot in the early days, every thing that we could, our seminars, etc., like you referred to. And then when it came time for us to get out of the full-time ministry with the shift in Marcia's health, then it was a natural thing. I think they asked me to do the media for the church. So I just thought, well, this is an awesome way to serve. And all these churches are growing and planting around the world. How are we going to keep them connected? And during that time, I grew a deep conviction that this is really who God is. God is the greatest communicator ever, and he's the greatest connector. But it's even deeper than that. His communication connects us. He sent Jesus, the Bible, right. The Holy Spirit,
right.
The Word, and our connection. Jesus said, our connection communicates God. If you love one another, you will show people you're my disciples. So God involves us in this process. We get to be part of the communication. We get to be part of the connection that communicates.
Right.
That's just pretty exciting to me.
It is. And, it's interesting to me how, the gifts that God gave you, you have this incredible baritone voice that sounds like a radio DJ from the 70s. I can see how you'd definitely get into that. But it worked hand in hand with the global nature of our family of churches, the international churches of Christ. Right. Now, Marcia, you guys started as a ministry couple. Now, Roger just mentioned that you got out because of your health. You moved into a different or broader field of global support and connection. Can you tell me about that decision process? And do you ever regret that move?
I would say no. I think they were both wonderful. I loved being in the ministry. I loved really being involved with people, women particularly, studying the Bible. But I have another glitch in my psyche here. I have ADD, and I was not very good at actually being a leader and organizing and pulling things together because there were just too many squirrels to distract me. And so in many times, I would ask another sister of maturity, great marriage, if she would step in and, help with our leading the region or whatever it was. So yes, it was never my gift. It was kind of an interesting thing that you bring that up because it was expected to be.
Right.
When a couple, you had to, hire a couple, and some of that still happens. And the woman, no matter what her gifts are or skills or limitations, she's going to be the woman leader.
Right, exactly.
And I think I did great. God helped me a lot with teaching. But as far as leading, organizing, that was not me. We raised a daughter, though, that she could have taken over for me. And she tried many times.
So what year was that when you guys decided, okay, we're going to step out of the preaching ministry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was 1990, I believe.
Okay, so fairly early. And I remember those days because, there was certainly a mold. There, the guy had to be a fired up, super type A type person, and so did the woman. So you had to have two, didn't have to, but strongly suggested, Yeah. And I think there were some powerful women during that time that kind of set the mold. Lynn Green's one of them for sure. Lisa Johnson, total drivers. And if you didn't, Chris Fuqua, if you didn't have that temperament, well, it was tough on you. Must have been really tough emotionally for you.
Yeah. I just made people laugh. And then, if I could make them laugh, it's okay.
Well, and God really worked here in a good way because Marcia had cancer in 1987 in the fall, and had radiation, and then that changed our family and tremendously because we were co-leading Chicago, coordinating 10 churches in the Midwest, started the Operation Saturation, the whole deal. But all of that came to a screeching halt. And Boston asked us to come there to scale back and to heal. It was so kind of them to take care of us that way. And then I was getting bored. So they said, why don't you start an arts ministry? Oh. So we started an arts ministry, the first one in Boston. That was one of the most fun ministries we ever did.
Absolutely.
And that's when it dawned on me, I married an artist.
That's right.
I was like,
I found my people.
Okay, now I get it. Yeah. But her stamina just wasn't there. I mean, from the radiation and everything else, she had like half a day's energy. Mm-hmm. And so that's when we finally went and said, I can't expect Marcia to do any of this anymore. Right. And that's when they said, well, would you come edit the magazine?
Okay. Well, it must have been tough for you, Roger, because at that time, everyone wanted to be full-time in the ministry. It seemed like, I know that's a broad generalization, but everyone who had some spiritual gift were like, you got to be full-time ministry. And it was an exciting time, lots of mission teams being sent out. So for you to kind of go in the opposite direction, that must have been challenging for you because you'd spent 15 years or so preaching up until that point.
Yeah, actually, I started preaching full-time when I was a junior in college.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, at the Possum Great Church of Christ.
That's another story.
That's another story.
An awesome story.
That's an awesome story. But so that had been 23 years. And it was a big shift, go from leading big churches and speaking conferences and all that kind of stuff to moving to a different region of the Boston church, showing up on Wednesday night, and nobody even acknowledged we were there.
Right.
And I'll never forget that moment because at first my feelings were hurt and I'm like, and then it dawned on me, you know what? This is good for you. Why am I here?
Right.
Am I here to be acknowledged or am I here to serve? That's the heart of a disciple. And So that was a really good clarifying moment
That's
for
awesome.
me.
Total refining
Yeah.
refining your motives. Marcia, you have a gift for writing and acting. You're both an actress and a writer. You know, how'd you? Of course, you've explained you were sick at that time and you needed to change your lifestyle. But you were a real trendsetter. You know, to write books back in the 90s, there weren't a lot of writers going on. And so to kind of cut off and just head off into the brush in a totally different way, how'd you manage that during the 90s?
Actually, it started when we were asked, I think, to write an article for the Boston Bulletin. I think we were still in Chicago when that started. And anyway, as I wrote, more and more stuff was coming out because it was about Michael and his leukemia and things I was learning from God. And it turned out not to just be an article for the front page, but it was like 3 or 4 front page articles for the Boston Bulletin. And so it became obvious there was a need for it. And then also that I had something to say and help. It was an interesting time too, because everything that I wrote at the beginning, the book, the articles, also had Roger's name on it. Couldn't be just a woman's name because, because they thought men wouldn't read it if it just had a woman's name. So anyway, that was that era. But I believe doing the writing also was very therapeutic for me. It helped me to really get deep and in my heart, do some searching. Why would God allow a child to suffer? And the title of our book, This Doesn't Feel Like Love.
Right.
When things don't seem right, I go after it. I want to know why.
Right.
A lot of times.
Okay, well, let's just jump off there and talk about kind of the second theme of your lives. One is connection and communication, but then the second one is just the illnesses you guys have had to deal with. Let's talk a little bit about the role and the toll that illness has played on you guys in your lives. I mean, your son, Michael, he's a minister in the Boston church now. He was diagnosed as a child with leukemia. Yeah. David passed away from leukemia. Mm-hmm. Your daughter, Christy, had health issues. She passed. So you've lost 2 children. You've had cancer, Marcia. I mean, okay, just reading that, I was hesitant to even talk to you about this because I go, how do you come back from something like that? I mean, how do you stay productive or even stay faithful when you face so much suffering and you're forced to justify God in the face of just total tragedy?
Well, thankfully, it didn't happen all at once. Mm-hmm. God was working. He is both preparing the way, preparing me, for what was about to happen. But he was also showing me things as it was happening, that he was there. I can't say that I was strong all the time. As a matter of fact, just even this year with all that's going on, COVID and all that, I've had some real low times. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways, there's a lot, but my nature has been, and I probably learned this as a young child. There was a lot going on as a child that was difficult. You just learn to, gut it out, have some stamina. But then as I became a disciple and seeing the role of Satan, wanting to destroy the goodness of God, I think his biggest effort is to plant lies about who God is. And I've learned that by I think studying the most I can about who God is, fighting off all of our nature to believe the lies. Started in the Garden of Eden. Did God really say? And even with Jesus, he would say, you can jump off this precipice, and so many things that I've learned through these experiences to not just assume my concept of God from the time I was very young was the true God. I've learned to tear some of that down and build the truth based on his word and based on his nature. And anyway, so I think during all this process, that's probably one of the things about me, that to really want to know God, why. They say don't ask why, but you got to ask why. Right. And then also know yourself. I've definitely got counseling. I definitely know my nature. I know, not totally, but the fact that some of the things we're hearing, some of the great themes this last year is to know God and make him known. That's everything. That's what it is. It's knowing God and making him known, and knowing yourself, I think, because my tendency is to toughen up, shut down, isolate. But more and more, God is sort of peeling back. Like, you can't keep denying this is hurting. You can't keep denying that. You've got to look at the pain so you can look at the healing. So you can look at, like this Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I was trying to be strong for everybody else in the family, and didn't allow myself to mourn much of the time. I could still gather awesome truths about God, but there's still a lot of reality, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. Sometimes I feel like just hanging on by my toenails, but right. I really do believe that, as I study, that the purpose for our suffering, as the Bible teaches, is to help us to understand God and Jesus more because of his suffering, but also to, in many of the situations, he has said to bring glory to God. And there are not many ways that call attention to a person in this day, where except this summer, this year, everything's being torn away. And we're all kind of getting down to the nitty gritty about who we are and how we handle hardship. And so I'm seeing that the purpose to bring glory to God, but then also have hope in heaven. It's not hope in this world. How it played out with Michael was definitely, he was cured. Awesome, wonderful ending. But with David, he wasn't. And that was conflicting. That was hard. That was like, why? It doesn't make any sense. But it helped me to understand that it's a level field. We all suffer. I'm not special because I married Roger Lamb. It's, and tearing it down and being on that level ground with my brothers and sisters and all that are suffering is, I think, the most I've learned, and the most compassion that I've learned has come from that. And then with Christy, oh my, if there are regrets, I wish that we knew more from the beginning of her life. We didn't know the heart of what she was dealing with. And it didn't come out till it was right toward the end of her life, that she had this immune system that just basically wasn't working. And she was getting infections all through her life, but we didn't know that. But it was through her that I learned that's what I have. And so because of all that she did and we learned together, I'm now getting the treatment that she needed. And So I just see God working, and I just want to make the most of what he's given me. And I do certainly hurt for people. And I wish I could make it all go away,
Right.
but it will in heaven.
Yeah.
It will in heaven. And I am about out of intelligence at this moment.
Well,
Thank you for asking.
yeah, it's just, in some ways you guys were, at that time, the movement was so young. I mean, you've got people in their 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, but you guys are experiencing illness, death, that now we're starting to see much more of that. People passing away, people like Gloria Baird, and people, experiencing a lot more trouble in their lives, but you guys experienced it up front. What would you advise to those who are struggling with illness, either their own or a family member's? What would you tell them?
That's really great.
Do you have
Yeah.
something in mind?
One thing would be you got to read the Bible, stay tight with God. You need to read her book. We're actually writing another half because it just goes to 1994. And we're writing another section that's going to be called "This Doesn't Feel Like Love Either." What's happening since then. But I think we learned so many things with Michael that we've reapplied over and over,
Exactly.
and it matured and deepened. But some of those crucial things are that you don't blame God. Job's stance. You don't blame God. And it never made sense to me to blame the only person who could help me. Ultimately, in every way.
Well, that was a question I had for you, Roger. Is like, I mean, I'd be mad. If that were me, I would just be so angry, mad. And how do you not be? I mean, you're saying don't blame God. How do you not blame God?
I think there's a difference between blaming God and being angry with God.
Mm-hmm.
Anger is a real emotion. Jesus was angry. So anger is different than, bringing it down and saying you're the fault of it. Now, you probably have those feelings from time to time, because we all, if we don't know God, and that's so key, God's nature, God is love. What does that mean? Why don't I believe it? Maybe it's because who my father was, but he didn't keep his promises. These are the kind of things that it's a blessing to have to question those things and find the answers for yourself with God.
I think that's really important. The key to that for me is that we got to understand who you should be mad at.
It's the enemy.
It's not that you shouldn't be mad. Grief, anger is a part of grief. And it really helped me when I saw really the original language when Jesus went to Lazarus' tomb and he wailed deeply. The word means visibly. And that says he was angry twice in that chapter. But who was he angry at? God created people not intending for them to die. That was not his intention ever. People decided to let themselves be duped by the devil. The devil's the one you get mad at. And please vent your anger at the devil. I think we need to do that. I think it's healthy to do that. I think that's what Jesus was mad at, was he saw the pain in his friends, and he was mad at the devil for what he'd done to humans. And I think we just got to direct it. I think another thing we really learned there was, do you let your illness define you? And that is a big mistake. And a lot of people do. They just let that define their life.
Right.
While Michael was going through chemotherapy treatments, we planted the church in Champaign because we decided, you know what, God's work still needs to be done. God will take care of things, but we're not going to let the devil have another victory by distracting us. We're going to let God develop us instead of the illness define us.
Right.
And we've used that principle many, many times over and over again. Little did we know how many times we'd have to use that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've certainly seen that, Roger, because, and Roger, we've had more contact than I've had with you, Marcia, but never in my conversations with you have I felt like that's the first thing you brought up. And some people, you're right, it defines them. They're the people that have this experience, and that's all they can talk about or ruminate on, or you can't really talk about anything else besides that particular issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a trap I think the devil wants us to get stuck in.
Right.
I think another really crucial thing is really understanding, Jesus said, in this life you will have trouble. So we got to get our expectations according to what he told us.
Right. Lower our expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
this is not the garden.
And we come in, well, I would be a Christian. Everything's going to be great now.
Yeah.
That's not what he told his own apostles, or he
Right.
told us. There will have trouble, but he will help us get through it. That's where real faith and real connection with God.
Right.
The other thing that really surprised me in the grieving was that I felt like I could understand a part of God I never got in touch with before.
Yeah.
Because imagine the grief God felt when Adam and Eve left the garden. Then imagine all through history, every person has turned their back on him, and he keeps having children. I'm like, I would quit having children.
Right. Right.
He even wiped them out once, started over, and promised he wouldn't do it again. But and then you get in touch with the grief that the father felt having his son die for us. Right. I'm like, I would never choose that for my son. It just blows me away that God would do that for me.
Right.
And I think we got to see those are doors opening to help us.
Right.
Another thing that really I have rested on a lot is Romans 8. There's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. And it even says not even illness or death.
Yeah.
So those things cannot separate us. We can choose to be separated.
That's right.
But the things that happen to us are not what separate us. It's how we react to them.
Right. I just wish, Roger, that when you're talking, so many faces come back from the past of people that have experienced the trouble, whether it's illness or marriage trouble, and they're no longer part of the, this family of churches, at least. I don't know where they're at spiritually, but so much bitterness, so much anger, because they didn't know how to deal with it. And it's just unfortunate, whether it's a conflict with another disciple, or it's sad to me. Let me just talk about one more aspect of this. A lot of people lose their marriage when they have a child die. I mean, I've seen that happen, where they end up getting divorced, and I always wonder why. But tell me about the impact on your marriage of having two of your kids precede you in death. I mean, just how'd you manage that marriage-wise?
We learned so much, with Michael, our experience with Michael when he was a child. One of the things that we saw was we would go in for his treatment, his bone marrow tests and different things, and we'd be sitting in a waiting room with other families, other parents, and each time, there'd be fewer couples. And then you'd eventually find out there were couples that split. And we even got with a couple in Charleston, Illinois, that were going through this. And I think one of the, well, obviously the big key is God unifies us. If we don't have sincere relationship with God, each individual, that's the key. But we each grieve differently. Took us some time, but thankfully it was during the time with Mike that we realized we're different. We grieve differently. I was like, I just wanted to hold him all the time, and I just wanted to, hang on to every moment and have special moments with him and take him to the park. And Roger, then on the other hand, and I cried a lot. Roger, on the other hand, was planning how was the car going to hold up to all these trips to St. Louis? Do we have tires that are going to hold up?
Right.
Let's see. Let's look at the bank account. Let's look at the insurance. But then I found out too that he was crying every morning in the shower. Oh. And so he was grieving. He was hurting, but it was different than me. So we learned that doesn't mean he was wrong. I was right. We've learned that in a lot of ways in our marriage. Just because we're different, it doesn't mean one's wrong and one's right.
Yeah.
We're just different. So.
Marcia put this in a phrase that I think is so appropriate that I've used many, many times personally and helped others. And that's share, don't compare. We don't compare our grief. We share our grief with each other, and it'll intersect somewhere, but you don't compare. The other thing that experience taught us was the cracks were already there in relationships. You apply pressure to them, and that's when they break. So that was a warning to us. We're like, we need to repair the cracks in our relationship. We need to be sure that people are involved in our life to help us with that. And we've had some very poignant moments of discipleship that have helped us with that, mostly on me. I think of a couple of really strong illustrations, but it takes work to do that. And vows, we've always believed that we made a vow, we're going to stay with it.
Right. Old school. Just you made a promise to each other.
Exactly.
Got to stick to it.
So if you're going to be together, you need to figure out how to do it in a happy way.
That's right. And that's what inspires me so much about you two, is I just think, okay, I would be tempted to just take my marbles and go home and just go, you know what? I gave my life to Jesus, and look what he's given me. And I'm just going to focus on trying to keep my marriage together and just kind of shut off any sort of productivity or advancing the kingdom. But that's exactly the opposite of what you guys have done. You've continued to build the kingdom and expanding in influence and service. That's powerful. I mean, you must have had to make a conscious decision, like, okay, like you said, we're not going to let this define us, but there had to be a decision somewhere along the way. I mean, that's just not the way I would feel.
Well, let me just mention people with chronic illness. I mean, I've got fibromyalgia also. Take another 20 minutes for me to tell you all the things that I deal with, but chronic illness is so hard to deal with because it's day by day pain or day by day inabilities. And that kind of illness really makes you question my worth. Why am I here? And he's such obviously like fired up Superman. He's Superman. Yeah. Right. And his spiritual Superman. But there's so many things I cannot do. And I have to say, I can't do that. I can't do that. And it hurts. I used to be able to do so much more. But I have had to, again, dig in and look at my relationship with God. And on what basis does he love me? Is it on the basis of how many studies I had, or if I got out today and shared my faith, or if I had a long quiet time, or was it just a short one because I couldn't stay awake? I mean, we get funny. We get so humanistic about our relationship with God, and we treat that like we would another human being, treat how another human being treats us. But God is so not that. God is so much love. But I did have to fight through that, because that's been my character for a long time, is that guilt and that feeling of I'm not valuable, I'm not contributing, I'm not, so why am I still alive? And I thought maybe it's because I'm like Job's wife to annoy him, that's why God left me around. Seriously, I've had to, if you don't mind, I've had to work through a lot with some books that have helped me. The one that helped me with that is his image. It's by Josh McDowell, His Image, My Image by Josh McDowell. And that has a lot to do with what I was saying about knowing God and knowing yourself and knowing how God loves you unconditionally. And what does that mean? What does it look like? And then How People Grow by Townsend. His books have been great.
Right. I love those books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, some of these books have really helped me a lot to get to help me. And I'm saying this to the other people who have those chronic illnesses that you feel useless personally.
Right.
And so then your question is, he could answer the one you gave.
Well, at one point in the 90s, it almost seemed like there was kind of a pandemic among ministry leaders with these types of illnesses, whether it's fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue. I mean, it's like another wife of a minister is down with one of these types of illnesses. And do you think there's anything in the job description itself that would contribute toward it? I mean, it seemed really prevalent, although it's a very small sample set to draw from.
Since we don't really know what causes those diseases, I don't know that I have an answer for that, except that, yes, I do think the pressure, undue pressure that perhaps some of the ministry wives felt to do things that, like for me, not having that skill, but also just pushing through. Your body's not meant to do that, and yet we do it.
Right.
And there was a time when it was more spiritual to get less sleep, and more spiritual to, give up this, give up that. And I, for years, thought it was unspiritual to clean my house. So I've had to get over that one. But I think that's along the lines you were asking, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yes, we do need to, again, God dealt with people individually.
Yeah.
Right.
When you think about the different letters that he had the apostles write, like Timothy, what was his nature like? What was he told to do? Take care of yourself, take a little wine.
Right.
But then there'd be other, Titus, he didn't get any of that advice.
Right.
Because he was different.
Right. Different temperament, maybe constitution. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're not all one kind.
That's right. Would it be okay at this point if we just take just a short comfort break? Would that be okay? Are you guys doing okay time-wise? And then we can just come back in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
This is going so awesome. I'm so excited. It just, both of your sharing is just, I can't wait. I just want to, hold on a second, let me turn off the recording. Roger, the 80s and 90s were in some ways, you could consider the golden age of the ICOC. Is there a turning point? And I think you hinted at it earlier in the conversation. Is there a turning point or a watershed moment that stands out in your mind during that time period when things went in maybe perhaps the wrong direction?
Yes, definitely. Like we said, I think 1980 was crucial. Kept going to Boston and reshifting the focus to planting churches and world evangelism. I think 87 was crucial in that was sort of the last call for people to come join the movement out of the traditional churches. And we started getting really separated, opposed from them after that. I think for internally in our movement, to me, 1994, 95, there was a watershed moment. And I'm planning to write more about this. But as I've looked back on it, I think some really strategic mistakes were made there. I think one of them, well, the big one was we got to thinking we knew what we were doing. And that makes you rely on God less. And I think then when the crisis happened, God just finally said, hey, remember me, I'm over here. And he spanked us on the butt and gave us some discipline, like Hebrews talks about. But I think the mistakes in 94, 95, the LA church, and Kip was driving this, he wanted it to become the biggest megachurch in the US. I think that changed a lot of thinking and a lot of stuff. So that's when he started pulling in all these leaders and having churches send their Bible talk leaders, and then expecting them to keep evangelizing at the same rate when he was stripping them of their leadership to build LA. And there was no gratitude, and a lot of hurt feelings there. I think the other big mistake that happened at that time was shifting the emphasis from the small group to the Sunday attendance. Our small groups were so strong, and were so, Marcia alluded to it before, they were so effective in discipling and evangelism. And, we were built on small groups, really. And then the shift to Sunday morning, and then there was that stringent rating. Every church was rated every Sunday on every Sunday.
Good, great, or awesome.
Exactly.
Good, great, or awesome.
And then the pressure was ramped up on evangelism. And, Bible talk leaders meetings Sunday afternoon or evening. You had a visitor there this morning. Why didn't you study with them this afternoon? And so we saw a huge ramp in the number of baptisms, and we saw a huge ramp in the number of follow-away leaving the church. And that's well documented. I published an article about it. I just ran across it the other day, years ago. Andy Fleming's published his great study about it. It just was a wrong focus. The third mistake, I think, was the 6-year plan. Not that it was, the evangelization proclamation was awesome, but to say that we were going to plant all these churches in 6 years and was considered great faith, but it meant countries where people would die if they went there as well.
Okay, Roger, one second. For those who are not familiar with those terms, 6-year plan, evangelism, can you describe what are you talking about there?
Yes, sorry. The world sector leaders at the time came out with this great evangelization proclamation. We were committed to evangelizing the world, and we had a plan to do it. And we're going to send out churches, raise up leaders, and within 6 years, we would have a church in every country in the world that had a city of at least 100,000. Well, that was a noble goal, but 3 years into it, it became really obvious this is hard in 6 years. And then towards the end, there was pressure to send people that weren't church leaders to go start churches to meet the goal. And there was no wisdom in terms of, let's reassess our goal here. Is this really a wise thing to do to build well? So that put all kinds of pressure on, then that put on financial pressure. It put pressure on these guys that was hurting their consciences who were on these continents You probably experienced some of that being in Asia. And I think that was it was one of those, a good idea gone wrong on implementation. So to me, those were the watershed movement. Oh, there was one other thing. I think the year 2000, we should have seen by then where the mistakes were leading us. We were celebrating, being in all these countries, which is still awesome. But there was a huge amount of hurt and misunderstanding and stuff among the membership that was swelling that people knew about. And it even led to asking Kip to resign and all that. I think if our leadership had really initiated going to our members and listening to them and empathizing with them and apologizing, if they had initiated that, I think we wouldn't have had the crisis of 2003. There were a few churches that did, by the way. Boston started that before 2003.
So you're saying initiating it was the key.
Right. The leadership didn't initiate it, so it swelled up from the people.
Right. Yeah.
And then we can go into that in more detail if you want, but to me, the simplest explanation is the firestorm illustration.
Right.
That dead wood collects in the forests, and then a spark comes.
Right.
And you have the forest fires in California.
Yeah. Right. And
right.
Exactly.
And dead wood in churches is unresolved conflicts.
Right.
And relationships. And we had stacked, and leadership didn't initiate, let's go resolve, let's go pick up the floor, resolve these conflicts. I think if we had, then to me, the Henry Crete letter was a match.
Right.
That's all it was.
That's all it was.
There hadn't been all the dead wood, it wouldn't have had it burned a little bit and burned out.
Well, Roger, if you could just go back in time and just do a little time travel back to one particular time period or event or meeting, when and where would it be? If you could just go back and just go, okay, I'm going to try to do my best to alter those events. Well, where would you go and when would it be?
Yeah, it is. I didn't really have a decision-making role at that time. I was the communicator. So, but if I could be in the decision-making group, I think it would be 1994 and then 2000. And try to, but it's going back with hindsight. All of us would be better going back with hindsight.
Of course. And that's the nature of the question there.
So to me, the question is not if I could do that, but what do I learn from that to do now?
Okay.
Going forward.
Okay. And what would that be?
We keep making mistakes. We're not finished making mistakes.
We're not? Right. Okay.
My motto is, let's make new mistakes. Let's not make those mistakes again. I don't think we have recovered yet from the shift on the emphasis off of the small groups. I think some of our smaller churches maybe have, because they see the need and the survival of them. But I don't think as a movement we have. I think learning the lessons from the past, we got to apply now. And learning how to be empathetic and listen and validate people's pain and pointing them to Jesus.
Right.
Instead of, okay, here, point you to Jesus.
Right.
Now be quiet.
Right.
That does not what Jesus did.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that was my next question is what do you see as the greatest need today in order to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches? And you've talked about an emphasis on small groups. And that's something that definitely stood out in my recent interview with Lynn Green, and just how she moved to Boston from Kentucky or from Duke just to learn how to be a Bible talk leader. I just, it just hit me, and it just brought me back. And I thought, at that time, as a member of the church, as a baby Christian, all I wanted to do was be a Bible talk leader. I just wanted to, I remember just how proud I was when I became an assistant Bible talk leader. And, just kind of moving up the ranks. And it was an honor to be able to lead a small group. And when she was talking about that, it just took me back at how that really was a thing. I mean, it was strong. It's having small groups. It was cool. There's a lot of leaders in the church.
Yes. Yes. And we were young, and the movement is like a person. I think, you start off young and you don't know much. You think you know everything. Well, that's when you get into teenage years. That's what I think happened to us in the 90s. We became teenagers as a movement.
When you're young, you need the direction, the rules, like a good young child. Yeah.
Right.
And we needed that.
And we knew it, and we accepted it. And then you get the rebellious, well, I know what I'm doing. And then you go, yeah, maybe I don't. And so I think we matured a lot since 2003. I think there's an incredible story to be told about how we've stayed together. What other organization, I thought about this a lot, organization, movement, whatever, has gone through what we've gone through, the losing the key leader, the founders, so to speak, the incredible amount of hurt and pain, the amount of apologizing the leadership did to the membership for things, not only what they did, they apologized for things they never did for other people. That humility challenged me in my legalistic mind. Well, I didn't do that, but that wasn't they were wanting to be like the Old Testament prophets. No, we as a people have failed.
Right.
And yet most of our leaders stuck around. Not all of them. Some of them were hired hands and ran off. Some of them were just hurt and ran off. But most of our leaders stuck around and were very humble and have put back together how we could work together. That is an amazing story. Now there's residual damage, I think, from that, but that I think a lot of our leaders lack trust, and I think you grow at the speed of trust.
Right. There's a book with that title. That's right.
It's so biblical, and it's so true about any group.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your role in that, Roger, because, let's go back to 2002, 2003. I remember when I heard that Kip had stepped down or was asked to step down. There's a big meeting in Los Angeles. I mean, it was just chaotic. It was like the walls coming down. And from our family of churches, we came from the traditional Church of Christ, which has a strong tendency towards autonomy in the church, that there's no superstructure binding us together. So all of a sudden, the only thing in our past is we're going to go back to a bunch of individual churches. And that's when you stepped in. And I remember you started Disciples Today during that time. And that's really become the glue in a lot of ways in binding people together, connecting people. We've got such a widespread worldwide movement. Tell me about what your thinking was during that time. How'd you come up with that idea? And how do you feel about it looking back 17 years later?
Thanks. That's really very much at the heart of my heart. I knew when things were falling apart, we lost our funding for KNN overnight. We were shutting it down, trying to decide what to do, where to go. And I was looking around, and I knew if we didn't have something to connect us, we would just dissipate.
Right.
And frankly, I believe we were that close to just dissipating as a movement.
Definitely.
And disappearing
Yep.
as a movement.
Yep.
And it wasn't all me, but I said, well, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I know how to start a website. So maybe I can do that. But I knew we had to have something where we could stay in touch with each other. So that's when we moved back to Chicago. My parents were in the church there and were aging.
My parents were in Indiana,
also aging, and my sister, who had Down syndrome, was aging, and so we moved back there, and we didn't have any means of support except some leftover KNN funds. So we just prayed, God, if you want this to happen, make it happen. If you don't, we'll figure out what else to do, but I've got to try. So we started a website in June 4th on 2004, a little website. We didn't even have a list of churches. We didn't have any of that contact information. The church that had been running the website in San Francisco refused to give us the data on our churches.
Oh my gosh.
And so fortunately, God brought this guy, Kelsey Hahn, into my life. He said, I'm really interested. I'm a data guy,
right?
And I want to help rebuild this. And so he helped me rebuild a list of churches and contacts. And then we started the church directory. We started telling good news of what was going on around the world. And fortunately, God had given me a lot of relationships through KNN, where I could connect with some of these guys that I knew and sisters, and ask them to send us stuff.
Right.
And so that's how it started, was just totally on prayer and God, if you want this to happen. Really cool story about that is that another brother, and this story has been repeated many times, but another brother in Dallas called me up and said, hey, I'm working for this great portal company. And portals were real big right then. And he said, I'm new here, but I think that we should use this for the church. And I thought I'm going to ask my boss if he'll do it for free. And my coworkers told me not to ask him because he's an atheist and he'll fire me. I said, wow, I love your idea and I love your faith. I said, but understand, I have no money to support you. I have nothing. He said, I know, God will take care of it. So I said, you pray about it. If you pray and God still has it on your heart. And he did. And he went in the first 3 years of Disciples Today, we were hosted and paid for by an atheist.
Wow. That's amazing.
Because of him. So, and then God has brought us people. Just, we needed something, we'd pray and God would bring the person.
That's so cool.
Over and over again.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It just brings up and then from that, you've got so many different offspring, whether it's DT Heart and Soul, DT Connect, all these different things that God blessed you with. But it was such a pivotal time, and it must have made you think so much of, that phrase from Esther was said, for such a time as this. God's raised you up, and all your gifts, all your talents, your connections with all the people. Because I remember you coming to visit us in Japan, and those relationships, boy, they sure paid off. And you're right. I mean, the kingdom was in shambles. It just was like an atom bomb. It just blown up everything. People were afraid, and that really did pull people together. And such a tribute to your love for the kingdom. Now, one thing that impresses me is that how did you remain so adaptable? I mean, at that point, you're in your 50s, websites, technology. You could have said, I'm not a technical person. I don't know how to do this. I mean, you weren't like a millennial. I mean, how did you develop that adaptability and flexibility to learn new technology in order to serve?
he he's so funny because he something comes up. He's never done it before. Oh, I'd like to learn that. I mean, that's who he is. I wanted to put this in somewhere.
Sure, go ahead, Marcia.
Early on in my maybe teenage years or college years, a woman told me one time, she said, young lady, if you marry a 10-talent man, you must let him be a 10-talent man.
Wow.
And that was her advice to me. And I hadn't even met Roger then, but her advice kept ringing. You know, that's, let him be a 10-talent man. He can do a lot, but also he just has that curiosity.
Right.
And I'm surprised. Who knows what he's going to do in retirement?
Who knows? I know he
some
mentioned
big
more
thing.
projects, you know, after retirement. I thought, oh my gosh, you're 73 now, you know, and already thinking about more projects. That's impressive.
Oh yes.
Okay.
I think too, it's you know, I get bored easy.
That's
Is one thing, but something again, you know, the parable of the talents. I don't believe I was a 10-talent person. I believe I used the talents that I had and made myself available to God. And then God would give me more talents that I never thought I would have. And I believe that's not just me. I believe that's available to everybody.
Yeah.
We have to give him the talents we've got.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Your whole life has been incredibly productive for the kingdom of God, and you've got to go out. I mean, just retiring here with your arms in the victory position, Marcia and Roger, I just go, it's pretty awesome. What do you attribute this consistency? I mean, we're talking going way back into the 60s, over 50 years preaching, teaching, dedicated to God's kingdom. Where does it come from? I mean, you've been consistent in the midst of the worst possible circumstances, losing children, having cancer. How'd you guys stay? You know, Jesus said the love of most will grow cold. How'd you keep your passion going? How'd you stay consistent in your service?
He's stubborn. That's his. Well, I'll let him talk about that. Almost get teary-eyed here. I think because God has healed me in so many ways, maybe not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. There are some dark things from my past that God has really, he's used the kingdom to really help me to see God's love, to work through so many things. And there's always growth. I think that's what helped me, is to know that I'm not, as a disciple, we're not stuck. We may feel stuck, but it may be that just God's leaving us in a place right now. So we'll get tired of it like he does. But it's such a growing, vital relationship with God and with other people that keeps me going, because I don't want to, I've been stuck in a rut before I became a disciple. And I just don't want to be back there. So I will keep fighting because I know God has more to teach me.
Wow.
And there's a home in heaven.
Amen. Amen to that. Roger?
I think I have a natural bent because both of my parents were stubborn, and but my sinful nature that also comes out. I think as I've tried to crucify that, you know, God says He will change that into a spiritual nature, and
kind of like Jacob. Just kind of a talented but kind of a worldly person, but God used him to form the nation.
Yeah, and taught him some hard lessons, right?
Good point.
And I think what God did was He made it into a vulnerable stubbornness. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I feel a lot more vulnerable to God and to other people now than I ever have, and not insecure about it. I think another very important thing was, trust is just a trust issue. God said he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. Now, he and I have had some arguments about that. And I've prayed literally for God not to trust me. So literally, I'm like, you got the wrong number here. But he said that I can bear this and he will help me. I can't bear it by myself. There's no way. Without God, we wouldn't be together. Our family would be decimated.
Well,
I think another real key is,
Roger, can you go, excuse me one second. Can you go back and vulnerable stubbornness? Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a willful stubbornness where I'm going to win, or I'm going to beat you, or I'm going to, but I think that's a sinful nature. That's my sinful nature. The vulnerable stubbornness to me is I'm not going to let anybody or anything take my relationship with God away from me.
That's great. Thank you.
I can't do it by myself. I have to have help from God. I have to have help from my brothers and my sisters. And the reason we're sitting here today is not just because we're wonderful. It's because God has taught us, and God has used people in our lives. And but I'm not going to let go of that, and I'm going to let God walk me through the valley of the shadow of death, up to the mountaintop.
Amen. Amen.
Also.
Amen.
Well, thank you. This has been an amazing interview. I just got two more questions. If you can just bear with me a couple more questions here. This whole program is for people who want to make a difference with their lives, to live no regrets lives, and to make the most of this life, make this life count. You certainly have done it, both of you. You must look back with a solemn sense of pride on your life and your accomplishments. But what advice would you give to a woman or a man who is looking at this and go, man, I want to live a no regrets life. I want to make this life count.
Wow. I think the first thing that came to my mind is take every day, live every day with wanting to accomplish something. Every day he says, well, what do you want to accomplish today? But that's true. It's like every day, it's not a vacation day. It's not just a here for me day. I think that's part of it. And part of that is because with having some challenges physically, I feel like many times I just have the widow's mite to give. And yet Jesus acknowledged that as a great thing that she gave.
Right.
And so that's the one thing. And then I think God has made it pretty clear what he's kind of taken away, things that I thought were important that aren't that important. And then helping me see more clearly what is really important. You're talking to young people. I know I wanted to do everything and be everything. I wanted to be with the singers. I wanted to, and I had some talent in those areas, so it's like, what, I want to try this, I want to try that. But then you have to realize the priorities, of course, God first and husband and family. But anyway, I think, I don't know. I know it's an important question to ask yourself and try things. But God is the one that's going to, what is the passage? You make many plans, but God directs your path.
Right, exactly. So
have your eyes open to see where he's directing you.
That's great. So make each life count, make each day count, give it to God, and then just give what you have and let him guide.
Right.
Okay.
And I think also being honest, like I was talking about before, what are your strengths?
Right.
What do you have to give that only you can give? There's some things that, like I said, I thought I could do this and this and this and this. And I did that in high school. I joined every club, but as you get more maturity, you realize there's one thing that only I can do.
That's right.
There are a lot of people that can sing. There are a lot of people that can do other things, but only I can be his wife.
Right.
You hear that? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm stubborn too.
The vows.
So, so it simplifies. Okay, I'm the mother of certain children. And
Right.
so I feel like each child was even a privilege from God that I had them for the time that we had them. And we got to see them finish their race. It was hard, but so that's what I do, is I try to simplify and think, what can only I do?
Right.
And that's one reason why we focused in on writing the book on our illnesses and overcoming, because only we can do that. Only I can do that.
And I can't imagine how many people have been helped from your book, from your experience. It's amazing.
Thank you. We do get a lot of appreciation.
Absolutely. Roger?
That's such a great question. And I remember being that age and wrestling with those things myself. And I think if I could tell my younger self something, falling in love with God takes care of so many things. Not falling in love with the church.
Right.
We're falling in love with God, therefore we love the church. That's why the two greatest commandments are love God first, first commandment, and then the second is love each other. Because if you get those flipped, they don't work.
Right.
Our own daughter did that first, and then wound up leaving God because of it for 12 years that were brutal and things I never thought we'd experience as parents. But then she came back with a vengeance when she got restored.
Amen.
And ended her life really strong. So I think that's so crucial, is fall in love with God. And then as a part of that, you make Jesus Lord and Savior. And Jesus is Lord and Savior. We got to keep remembering the simple things are the strongest truths. And then everything else comes out of that. That helps my priorities. That helps me plan my life, my time, my job, everything, my marriage, relationships, everything. And then, I'm in love with God, and I'm grateful that I've been redeemed. Never forget that. We don't deserve this, none of us.
Right.
And then what's that place in the body that God has picked out for me to specialize in, like Marcia said, and to excel in, and then make myself available. Not wait for somebody to ask me, but make myself available and initiate. And then I think the other thing is being willing to take risks. The person who never risks never succeeds. They may fail, but they will succeed eventually. And there is no success without failures. There's just not.
Right.
So I think often I think of the Indiana Jones scene. This may not relate to some of our younger folks now. I'm thinking about it. But go watch the movie where he has to cross the chasm to get to the other side.
Right.
And there's no bridge.
Right.
We'll step out. but there's no bridge. Yeah, you have to step first.
That's
He
right.
stepped out, the bridge appeared.
That's right.
And to me, that is the walk of faith.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
the walk of
absolutely true. It's so true, Roger. Love that movie. Love that saying, the step of faith. You know, you're retiring here in just a few days. You left a great legacy there with Disciples Today. And you're like the master connector, the great connector here of our family of churches, just definitely instrumental in keeping us connected. What do you see as necessary in order for our churches to stay connected going forward?
Thank you. I've been praying about that a lot. And there's a lot of discussion among the leadership about that. And obviously it's generation to generation. You know, and a great Bible study for anybody to do is just look up the word generation on Bible Gateway or something and read those scriptures. God is interested in generation to generation. So I think it's raising up more generations and then helping them connect with that vision and that dream, and then empowering them to accomplish dreams, and not the dreams of the past. Every generation has its own uniqueness and its own challenges. So I think it's what is the challenge now for this next generation? Now, one of the biggest challenges is building these relationships among them, because in the beginning there weren't that many of us. We all knew each other.
Right.
It's just bound to happen if you multiply. But they were all over the world, and now those guys had relationships with the key leaders they raised up. It's another great story of our movement, how quickly local, national leadership was raised up to take over.
Right.
But now those original guys have been gone a long time. And now other generations are being raised up that don't know even the original founders of the churches, let alone churches elsewhere. So I think we have to use social media. I think God has given us incredible tools. What do you think Paul would have done with the internet?
Oh my.
He had to write on a papyrus and send it on a donkey months to get to a church, right? So I think we got to figure out how to use these tools to keep us interconnected and build more relationships. I love what the campus and the singles are doing with these international devotionals and stuff like that. God sent us all to our rooms, so we'd have to all be Zoom experts, figure out all this stuff, you know.
He's thinking. He's
thinking. But I think you have to intentionally build those relationships too.
Yeah.
And that involves people and money.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to give the people and spend the money. And so short-sighted for us not to spend money to build relationships.
That's right.
Because those are the tendons, according to the scriptures. Those are the tendons that keep the body together and functioning. And if those tendons shrivel, the body will not work.
Right. Well, Roger and Marcia, thank you so much for your time today. It's been inspiring. It's been powerful to look back on our history. And I want to thank you so much for all your service to the kingdom of God, the trials you've gone through and persevered through and set such an amazing example. And I want to congratulate you on your retirement coming up here in a few days. It's an honor to be able to interview you right before your retirement. I know that your example is going to inspire many people to make this life count and to live a no regrets life. And I want to thank you today for listening to the Rob Skinner podcast. My goal is to inspire you to make this life count, to live a no regrets life, and to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. If you're enjoying this podcast, please let your friends and family know. You can also email me with feedback or questions. I'd love to hear from you. My email is rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org. I want you to have a great day and make this life count.